Record. All right. Hi, everyone. Great to be able to get your questions. And here's some things that you'd like us to chat about. There's kind of four main sections that kind of ordered that we're going to order the session in. And the first is kind of course-related questions, which I'll handle. So that's kind of topics around grading and things like that. Then there were design questions, and then there were some industry questions, like how to find a job as a front-end dev or things like that. And then finally, there's some technical questions, especially seen around APIs. So we'll be having a look at that too. So I'll handle the first section on course-related questions. And the first one is about reports. So I can quickly answer that. Do you need to reference Adobe XD in your reports? No, you don't need to reference the tools that you're using. That's fine. There's a question about stock photos and whether you need to reference those. If it says that you need to reference it, then you should reference it in your report. So the where you get the stock photo from will tell you whether you need to give attribution or not. If you're using a site like Unsplash, then you don't need to give attribution. So that's fine. You don't need to add that attribution there. Do you need to reference material that we give you? The answer to that is no, you don't need to reference, say, things that are in the lesson. Occasionally, I will get like a specific question from a student, can I do it this way? And then I will tell them, look, just mention in your report that you spoke to me about this, just so that whoever's marking it at the end understands why you made this decision, and that kind of I cleared it. So yeah, that's fine. In terms of the referencing in general, I would say please use resources. Feel free to look on sites like Stack Overflow if you get an error or a bug or something. Use MDN, use CSS tricks. Like there's a bunch of these websites that are going to be very helpful to you as a developer. And it makes sense that you use them and read them and see how other people have solved similar issues. What I really don't want to see is I don't want to see copy pasting. And it's usually very obvious because the class names are completely different to everything. All the other class names, the way that the code is written is clearly different or above the level at where you might be at. So just please don't copy paste is what we specifically don't want to see. What we want to see is your attempt to achieve the goal. And the reason for that is quite obvious, that this is a vocational school and we're trying to make sure that you're ready to enter the job market as a developer. And if we don't know whether you have the skills, it's very difficult for us to assess your skills if we're actually assessing another developer's skill. And if you copy code from something like W3 Schools, you're probably going to get marked down just because it's quite an out-of-date resource. And so those ones are usually very easy to spot. But yeah, do please reference sites and blogs that you've read or videos that you've watched. There's often like interesting tutorials on how to use a certain technology or whatever. And if you've used that in your assignment, then please do reference it. All right. Let me look at the next question. There was a question here in terms of a style tile. So I imagine that some of these questions are going to be from August 21 students who are, say, at a specific point in the course. Just to say, generally, what we want is you to produce the best possible work that you can. So we don't want to put like a whole bunch of barriers in front of that. So don't feel like if you chose Verdana for your font in the one assignment, that means therefore you have to keep using Verdana, even though the teacher suggested maybe try a more unique font or something. Like, we do want you to, you're constantly going to be learning and therefore can improve what has been done. So the code that I write today, I'll look back on in a year's time and wonder why I ever wrote the code that way, because I'm always learning and always improving. And that's very much, I think, got to come across as a skill of a front-end developer, is knowing that you don't know everything, and being able to accept that you always want to improve and always want to read and learn. And then I have another question in terms of how formal the reports should be. So we've tried to simplify the reports, I would say, overall. And the things that we really want to see focused on in the reports are what your process was. So, I used this program and I decided to build it this way. So very much the how, then, the what, and then how you did it. So I tested using this program. I explain how you built the thing. I used CSS grids, and then I want to hear why you used CSS grids. So explain the why. I think the why is probably the most important part in a report. I chose red as my error color because red is a good warning color. I chose to use CSS grids because it reduced the amount of code that I needed to write, possibly. Whatever the reason, we want to hear the reasoning for the decisions that you make. There's another question on the CA only being 1 week. So that's the standard is usually that your CA will take 1 week to complete. Occasionally, if the CA isn't very taxing, we might include a few extra content lessons then. But generally, a CA will be a week. And then the assignment should take you around 40 hours to complete if it's a CA, because then that's 8 hours per day. Actually, no, sorry, 48, because it's 5 days. And then there's another question on the grades. Can you explain how the grade system works? So I'm not too sure of the exact question there, but I'll try to give you an overview. So we have lesson tasks, and those are to reinforce what gets covered in the lesson. And those are done for you, by you, and those don't get submitted to us. It's just a way of being able to reinforce what you've learned in the lesson. Then you have a module assignment, which is always submitted. Either it's a quiz or it's something that you have to hand in, and that covers everything, all the content for that week, or module, should I say, because it's 2 weeks if you're part-time. And then that is a good indication of whether you're on track to pass your CA. So I would strongly encourage you to submit MAs, because if you don't, we can't know if you're going to actually pass the CA. But it is the CA that determines whether you pass or fail the subject. And that is marked as pass-fail, even though we give a number grade for your CA. On your final certificate, it will say pass or fail. And then for your projects, so that's semester projects and project exams, those are marked as letter grades and will appear as letter grades on your final certificates. So I think that's all of the questions that I had in terms of referencing and just in terms of coursework.
Okay, I think there was one half of the question, that last question, which was how, is the workload for a CA similar to the workload in real life, which is a slightly difficult question to answer, but I think a good one.
Yeah, okay, so I would say in terms of the workload, we try and give you realistic workloads based on what skills you have at that point. And we try and figure out how long it should take you based on where you are in the program. So as you'll progress in the program, what you're able to do in 48 hours is going to increase quite a lot. So what might take you, 4 hours one day might take you an hour the next. So we try to gauge how much time you need to be able to complete a task. I would suggest if you're struggling and I can't figure this out, then you should be messaging the tutors and asking for some insights so that hopefully we can help speed things up for you. But yeah, I would say that we're probably trying to match more where you are in the course rather than where you will be in 2 years' time, which will be different.
Okay, cool. So I think we're going to move on to, I think we have 3 design-related questions for Bonita.
Thank you, Oliver. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to kick off with the first one, and that is creating wireframes from scratch. Now, that could be interpreted as wireframes, low fidelity wireframes where you draw everything on paper. And ultimately, whenever you start wireframes, you have to start by drawing on paper. I wouldn't progress to mid fidelity or high fidelity without having some form of sketch, whether it is on a paper or balsamic. In the case of productivity, some people try to download plugins for wireframe just to speed up the process. You can do that if you want to, and this will aid you in your process or just make things work a bit faster. Alternatively, you can create it from scratch. My recommendation is to create it from scratch. Even when you go to high fidelity to create from scratch. This is just based on what the stakeholders or the clients want. Sometimes some of them are happy to use material or Google's wireframe kits, and you can just adapt it accordingly. Other times, people want you to create it from scratch. So it's actually up to your clients and ultimately you and what the deadline is. If they want the wireframes within 2 days, then I would suggest using the UI kit or an established wireframe and just interpret it in your own way. But they can be quite a lengthy process. So it all depends on what the client wants and the deadline. So I think I covered that a bit more. Let me see if there's anything else. And then the next question is prototyping. I know we have a lot of questions about prototyping. So what prototyping is actually you are adding an interactive component to your design, and this allows for assessing the design if the user can test it and if it actually works. So the reason why we create prototypes is it is essential for the developers to see how the interaction will flow, and importantly, what would it look like in the end. I just want to see, go through the stages, what exactly happened in the prototype phase. So essentially how I used to do it back in the day is you would take your wireframes, your high fidelity wireframes, and prototype those and send it off as handle files to your developer. But seeing that you guys are the developers already, you will then use those prototypes and convert them into HTML, CMS. And this is like a safety net. This will allow you to test your product before you go into development stage. So you and your clients can pick up errors before you actually build it out in HTML. Then you don't have to go back all the way to the wireframe section to see, okay, where was the problem? Where was the error? So it's like a safety net, and you really need it in the design process. I wouldn't skimp on it. the same with wireframing. It is a good starting point for both parties in the environment. So yeah, I think that's all, Ollie, from my side. If there is any other questions.
No, I think MJ covered the other question, which was sort of design related. So next up, we're going to be talking about the industry, not just technical questions, but what it's like to work as a developer for a company. I have something prepared for this. Martin, do you have something as well?
Yeah, I'll go after you, Oliver.
Okay. All right. So what is it like to work in the industry as a developer? It's quite a big question. Every company is a little bit different to the next. So you are going to have a different corporate culture in each company, and that can really change your experience. So to say that working as a developer is exactly this way or exactly that way is very hard to do, because someone working for Google is going to have a very different experience than someone working for a small company or a small agency. Maybe they only have 3 or 4 developers, whereas Google has thousands in many locations all around the world. So in terms of corporate culture, like some of them will be relaxed and lighthearted, some of them will be quite serious and sort of strict and procedural, less of a fun place to go and more of a important place to go. Like if you're working for a bank or something like that, they're going to have very careful regimens around how code is handled, and this will have an impact on your experience. There's lots of companies that require developers that aren't necessarily things you would think of. So obviously a development house or a development agency will have developers, and that'll be most of the staff. But also like a bank or a government or a media agency, a security company, all of these types of industries require developers to be hired directly. So if you're working directly for in an industry, you're going to learn a lot of other skills that other front-end developers won't be dealing with. For example, I used to work in the radio industry, so we often had to handle live streaming and podcast recording on the fly. So I know a lot about audio handling, but that's something that you almost never touch upon if you are making WordPress websites, for example. So a lot of it depends not just on which company you go to, but what that company does itself, who their clients are. And that will have a big impact. So if you are imagining that you're working for a huge tech company like Google or Facebook, there's going to be very clear specializations, even within front end. So you already have back-end developers who are responsible for databases and API service and that sort of thing. And you have front-end developers, which is all of us. And even within that subset, you're going to have animators, you're going to have testers, people who are concentrating on the performance of the code, not just whether it works or not, but whether it works efficiently. It's going to be people who are specialized in accessibility, making sure that users who are differently abled can access information on a page using a screen reader or other tool. There's the user experience engineers who are trying to put themselves in the mind of their users and analyzing the user's behavior and trying to make changes so that their application is more enjoyable to use. And then you have some things like research. R&D is great fun. You look at new technologies, you look at new ideas, you assess them. Are they ready yet? Can we use them as a company? And then if you're happy with them, they get rolled out and implemented. So that is my way of saying that it varies enormously, but typically it is more laid back than other jobs sort of with a similar pay grade. There is the stereotype of developer wearing jeans and a t-shirt when everyone else in the office is sort of dressed in a suit and pretty formal. That's fairly true, although there's nothing to stop you from dressing smart in your workplace by any means. But I think that informality does sort of run through the industry to a greater degree than other jobs in the same sort of bracket. Martin, over to you.
Great, thanks, Oliver. I think you covered that all really well. So there's just sort of some things I'd just like to just sort of complement what you've said. So what I'll actually speak about is more like what actually goes on your day to day. And there's just a little bit of differences between a physical location and working remotely. I was team lead for my previous position for about a year. So I've got a bit of experience in the hiring process. Generally, when you join a company as an entry level or junior level developer, they aren't expecting you to know everything. They will typically have a mentor that's going to sort of show you how things work, and then he's going to be there to, they will be there to catch any mistakes that you can make. When you're actually working with your code, it's not just going to be a matter of you make some changes and you just push it to a repo. There's a process that you will be following at a company where you're going to be given a task, and then you have to go and complete this task. And then when you push your code, the senior developers or one of the higher ups, they're going to go and they're going to review your code and see, okay, look, everything is good, Jab. It's added to the code base. Or they're actually, most of the time, they're going to be saying to you, look, here's a mistake, here's a mistake, here's a mistake. And they're going to help you fix it. I know in the beginning, it sort of feels like they're like the enemy or someone that's criticizing you, but they're actually just there to make things, to help you. And they're meant to shape you as a developer. Any good company is going to have senior developers mentor the younger developers. When I mean younger, I don't mean by age, but just years of experience. You should go into a business with the expectation that there's going to be people mentoring you. So just want to look at now the difference between a physical and the way that we're working now remotely. Usually when you go into an office, you had like a mentor that you could sit with, and they would show you, they'd come to your screen or you'd go to theirs and they would show you what you need to do. But things have changed now because, the dream for everyone is to work remotely. So it's a lot harder for the mentoring process to take place working remotely. They can't just go and sit and watch everything you're doing. So basically the way that it works now is what I described earlier is pushing your code, and they're going to review it and then maybe hop onto a Zoom call or Meets or whatever and discuss it with you. Not sure if this is a question for later, but this is something that I need to mention. When it comes to being a developer, it's not just about the code you're writing. A lot of it is actually soft skills, as they would call it, which means sort of communicating with the team, working well together. Companies most of the time will actually prefer a person that's well-rounded, that has all of these skills over someone that's actually just a really good developer and doesn't work well with others. That person's not going to be part of a team. But I'm going to jump into that later on. I believe there is a question about that deals with this.
Yeah, and I think just one more thing to mention about the change that we've experienced in the last 2 years with the pandemic, and so many more people working from home. The other thing to bear in mind is that when you're working from home, you're not commuting to another place. And so there's a little bit of a challenge in balancing your work and life, because at the end of the day, you're probably still going to use your laptop. After 5 p.m., you're going to be using your laptop for whatever, social media or gaming. And it's easy to lose that definition. So part of being an effective remote developer is having good time management, setting yourself boundaries and limits, and no one's really going to do that for you. You have to do that for yourself. But one of the nice things is that if a light bulb goes off at 9 p.m., you can sit down and do 30 minutes of work, and you might have saved yourself many hours the next day, if you just happen to have something click in your head. So I appreciate having that flexibility, but Martin's correct. There is a lot lost by not being face-to-face, and it's a choice that now in every interview, the candidate should be asking, is this a remote position, partially remote, or is this in office? And they should make a decision based on who they are as a candidate, not based on, if you're keen to learn directly from other people, an office job is going to be much better. So yeah, I think that's covered the first two questions. Martin, what's the best way to find a job in the industry?
Definitely, there is actually one sort of correct answer for this, and I know I'm going to get shouted at for saying that, but when it comes to getting a job as a developer, the best thing you can have is not just an education on its own. The best thing to have as a developer to get a job is a good portfolio. And that does not mean having a portfolio website. It means that you've got a whole bunch of projects that you've actually built out that you can go and show the potential employer that this is the stuff I've built. People will forgo degrees and things like that if you've got a strong portfolio. Whereas if you've just got the degree or the education, you've got no work to show for it, your CV is going to go to the bottom of the pile. Because any person can go and get a CS degree, but they might not have any work experience. They can't suddenly just fit into your company. Whereas like look at the North course, you're getting the education, but they're also having you do what I call is project-based development, or project-based learning, sorry. As you're going through the course, you are actually going and building out these projects. And as you finally get to the end, not only are you actually sitting with an education, you're actually also sitting with this massive portfolio of projects so that you're almost ready to jump straight into a job. Or you should actually be ready to jump straight into a job. It's not about all these amazing Google code, like these algorithms that you can come up with. Is that, do you know how to go and git pull, and can you git push this to a repository without any problems? And are you able to go and document your code? It's things like that. If I hire you today, are you going to fit right into my company and start being able to, push out code? Or is it going to be that it's going to take you another 6 months for you to just learn how Git works, learn like what JavaScript works? Because a normal computer science degree, you're learning things like C++. You're going to have no experience with web development technology. So yeah, the biggest thing that's going to matter is a good portfolio. And like I said, that's not a website that shows you each project. A portfolio is just all of your projects that you've done together. So it might actually be beneficial to you if you've got the time, that when you are actually building out these projects, maybe just spend a little bit of time to sort of polish it, so that at a later stage, you never have to come back to it. You can actually go and submit this as, put it on a public profile and be like, check this out, I built a to-do list, check this out, I built this, I built that. So that's the most important thing. Then it'll be working on your CV. Your CV needs to be good, and you can't just go and use like Microsoft Word and just pump your stuff into CV. You actually want to use something like a CV creator, because there's metadata that goes into CV that a lot of the recruiters, they will run your CV through like an app, and it's going to go and check all your fields. And if that metadata doesn't exist, there's a possibility you're not going to get considered at that company. So you want to sort of use, like you get free software online. There's one that I actually even use for my CV. I could drop it later. And you just go and you fill that in. You could even actually build this yourself in React if you wanted to. But what's important is that metadata stays in those CVs, so that they're capturing information you're not going to fall out of that list. And yeah, that's the basic two there. Then after that, it's just a matter of creating as many job alerts as possible. When, like on Google, if you search for job, you can create a job alert, and then the same with Indeed. Those two sites alone, if you go and you do multiple searches, you'll have your inbox flooded every day with multiple jobs that you can apply. And then just on the subject, sorry for rambling on you, but you're never going to get it right first time with the interview. That's a complete separate set of skills to have, is to master interviews. Like, I'm not joking. It's like a complete separate, it should almost be like a module to learn how to interview. Like, I actually purposely went and started interviewing with big companies like Facebook and a couple I'm just not going to mention, just so I could get that experience. And it doesn't matter if I lost, if I got kicked out or rejected or whatever, I just needed that experience so that I can teach others about the interview process. And you're not going to get it first time around. If you do, you're very lucky. A lot of it's going to be, you're going to get blocked, you're going to get blocked, you're going to get blocked. And then eventually you will get in. You will at some point in time. So try not to get disheartened. And something that's important to remember is that you just need that first job. It doesn't matter about the other ones. You just need that first job. You just need to get your foot in through the door. And once you do, 6 months after that company, you can start looking at other jobs. You don't have to, but after that, then the whole world is just open to you after you've got that first job. It's just that first job that's a challenge.
Yeah, I think that's covered it pretty well. One thing I'll add is that it's very common in the tech industry, especially in coding, to request a like an assignment as part of the interview process, a technical assignment. So for example, an employer might ask you to build a weather app or a simple sort of one-page application just to show that you understand how a certain framework works. If the company is working in Angular, they might ask you to make a very small Angular application. That is often a challenge when you are juggling lots and lots of different processes. So if you've applied to 15 jobs at once, and now you're being asked by 15 different people to produce 15 different assessments, you have to choose which ones you're going to prioritize. You have to be careful about loading yourself up too much. Much better to do one of these things at a time and do it really well than to be stacking 4 or 5 at the same time and rushing and not completing them properly. I have done many of these assignments over the course of my career. Most of them came with a rejection and no explanation of why there was a rejection. That is normal. HR people are very busy. They look at a lot of CVs. It's not personal. If you don't make it to a position, keep going, find the next one. It might be disappointing, but it's not the end.
It's not a big deal, man. It's really not at the end of the day.
Okay, so we've got, okay, so yeah, I left this one off. What are some skills that are useful to a software developer that are not specifically included in this course? I think all of us can kind of answer that differently. So Martin, you can go first.
Yeah, sorry, I'm the one that popped it in there because this is an important one. When it comes to especially remote development, but also just development in the normal workplace, physical location, good communication is greatly desired by your employers. Being able to have good communication skills it's just something that you need to have. If you are looking to sort of climb up the ladder, it will take you very far. For example, myself, I learned to do legal writing from a company that I was working at, and for about a decade, I just got legal writing experience. Then in my previous jobs, whenever there was a client, my bosses knew that I could communicate very well in writing. So anytime that there was a client, I was the one that was put in charge to communicate with them. And then that eventually got me into a team lead position. So this is something that I have to emphasize. And I know that, you know, being from Norway, dealing with an English environment, that might be a bit more difficult. But good communication skills it's vital. Like, I actually want to argue sometimes it's even more important than the coding itself, because we can always get coding done, but miscommunication can completely break a project. So that's just an incredibly important one, is to learn how to speak in a business manner, learn how to conduct yourself, know when you should be making jokes, when you should definitely not be making jokes. And yeah, that's just incredibly vital to have.
I've got a related one, which could be called part of communication skills, but expectation management is a very key term when you're working in the industry. And the idea is that the people who are asking you to perform a certain task need to know they need to know accurately when it's going to be ready. If you take one look at the task and you're feeling very confident, you say, oh, it'll be done tomorrow, it's easy. You've now established an expectation with that person. And if you run into a problem, they're going to be asking you the next day, where's this code? Why isn't it done? You told me it would be done in one day. You told me it was easy, and it's not here. Instead of burning through the night to get this thing finished for the next day so that no one is angry with you, you set expectations properly and you say, it looks like it's going to take about one day, but let's put the deadline here so that if something comes up, I have a chance to handle that separately. When someone is requesting work from you, often they'll be asking you or the team lead how long it's going to take, because they don't know. They're not the ones developing. If something is going to take you 2 hours, but you need 4 hours to test, and you need 2 hours for someone to review your code or what have you, you need to build all of that time in. It's not just, okay, open the editor and start coding and finish. There's a whole process, and you have to pad your estimate to make up for that process. And this is the best way, just to avoid stepping on someone's toes, avoid irritating someone. No one likes missed deadlines. As a team lead, it's very frustrating because it's your team who are missing the deadline. For the business side of the company, they have made promises to their clients or to their higher ups, and that is important to respect because those are the people who are probably paying your salary. So that's an important one to remember. I also had formal language on my list. I will say, like, time planning is related to expectation management. You can't do one without the other. Think carefully about how much time something's going to take you. If you're just like doing your own project and there's no deadline, you can spend 4 hours reading up on this random thing. That's fine. But if you're in a work setting, you probably won't have that time available. You need to be shrewd. If something is taking you more than 2 hours and you thought it was going to take 1 hour, you need to stop there and make someone aware of that. Instead of suffering in silence and instead of waiting until the deadline comes and then falling flat on your face. As soon as you know there's an issue or your timing is going to be off, tell your senior dev and they'll start making a plan to accommodate for that. I think it's very useful to have a pretty good understanding of mathematics, particularly geometry in front end. Mathematics is my weakest discipline. I never liked it at school. I never saw what the point was. And then I started developing and I realized, oh dear, I'm going to have to get much better at this. And that is very much an ongoing process. I'll probably be studying mathematics until I'm an old man. On the other side, I think artistic expression and creativity is very important. Coding is, it's engineering, but it's also front-end development is a chance to bring style and personality and life to something that would otherwise be sort of bare. And if you don't have, well, having another form of artistic expression just naturally exercises that part of your brain. Could be music or painting or what have you. And then finally, learning how to use Linux or Linux is crucial. Not because you'll be using this as your main software or your main operating system, although you may use it. It's because almost all web servers are running on Linux, and if you know how to navigate around that operating system, you're going to have a much easier time when it comes to troubleshooting issues and understanding what's gone wrong or what needs to be done. So those are my answers. I don't know if MJ or Bonita, you have something to add.
Yeah, I'll add just a kind of a broad skill, and that is problem solving. I sometimes come across students and I find that they think that there is a 100% right way to do lots of things, and like there almost never is. Someone's just had to problem solve their way to figuring out a way to do it, and then someone else has done the same, and it turns out their way is slightly faster, better. Almost all that development is solving a problem, and it's usually problems that you've not come across before. If there's problems you come across before, you're probably likely to solve them quite quickly, but the big chunky tasks that you get handed are usually things that you haven't done before. And so what we're hoping to impart is the ability to adapt and learn, rather than know everything about front-end development in the 2 years. You're not going to know everything. Like being a developer is a constant cycle of learning and learning and learning. This industry moves very fast, and so you're almost always having to play catch up with what the newer technologies are, but even just in yourself, like your skills. So yeah, I would say don't expect that when you work in a real job that you'll always get problems that you've already seen before. It's likely that you're going to have to problem solve and figure new things out. That's what I was going to say.
I just want to add on that as well, MJ. the thing that I noticed and that is also nice is that, as you mentioned, problem solved communication for design and also collaboration. You are going to have to be working with a lot of people in an environment. So whether it's developers, designers, project managers, traffic managers, as well as creative directors. So it's important to be present where they are and learn how to work with them. And you can always learn from them. Another thing I also wanted to bring up, and I know it's a bit late, but in the industry, when you fresh out of university or when you've done your course, is to look up to mentors and other developers and just try and connect with them or network with people that you admire in the industry, and maybe send them an email and say, I would love to send my work to you. Can you review it? And if your work is very strong, they would refer you to other people. So my advice would be is to network and share the work. Don't hide. Share your work, because you can only be seen if you share your work. And yeah, that's my tip.
Okay, thanks. All right, to finish off, we have some technical questions, which I imagine is what most of you thought the session was going to be, but I'm actually glad that we covered quite a broad set of topics here. So we have 3 questions, 2 of them are related. What is an API? It is not actually very helpful if you break it down into what it stands for. It's an application programming interface, which is a very broad term. What it means is that this is the language that one program is going to use to communicate with another program. And that's really the end of it. It could be that an electric car is communicating with its battery unit. There's going to be an API that someone has written that will control that communication. How do you access this data? How do you access this data? In the context of front-end development, it really just means 2 things. And one of those is much more commonly referred to. So when we talk about an API, it is almost always referring to a remote data source. So a server running somewhere that is serving up raw data so that it can be consumed in JavaScript. You go to this URL and it returns you this data back. The other definition that you might come across is when you're looking at something like local storage, or you're looking at like the browser history or location access in the browser. These all have their own APIs. It's not a remote server. It's not a data source. It is something that's inside your browser that you need to use the correct language in order to access. So that's sort of the high level. I have an analogy which might be helpful, which is that you can think of, if you think of a conventional sort of brochure website, which has a list of, has 4 pages about us, contact us. It's static information that is designed for a human to read and enjoy and understand. With an API, it's almost the exact same thing, except it's not designed for a human to read. It's designed for another program to read it. So it's not formatted nicely. It's a big mess of JSON data. It doesn't, you can't easily go through and read it one by one, but it's not meant to be, used by human eyes. It's meant to be consumed by another program. So in the same way that you can go to /contact.html and see the contact page, if you go to the contact API endpoint, you might receive a list of contact information for that company, where their address is or what have you. The only difference is who the intended audience is. So the related question to this was, how do you work with a remote API? And I think, to be honest, we're going to cover that in a future session. It's quite a big subject. We're a little bit low on time. So I think we should probably pull that out into its own live session because it's a very important question. But fundamentally, you use JavaScript to request data from an API. If you don't know how to do that, you have to go and read the API documentation, and it will explain. Sometimes it's quite hard to understand API documentation, but it will always explain how the API works and how you can connect to it and consume it. And then we cover API handling in one of the later courses. So I won't get into the nuts and bolts in this session. Martin, have you got anything to add to that?
No.
Okay. All right, the last question is about form validation. This is one of my pet subjects. I am really into HTML forms more than is healthy. In my previous position, we had, when I started off, we had a lot of forms that were not working correctly. They weren't semantic, they weren't formatted correctly in HTML. And so I've been through a long process of getting everything to industry standard and learned a couple of lessons in the process. So the best thing, I mean, the way to explain validation is that when someone's submitting data on your application, you have no control over what they're submitting. So when you're writing your code, you're writing careful code, you're testing it, you're making sure that it's robust, it's not going to fall over. But when a user is sending data into your application from the Wild West, you know, the internet, it could be anything. It could be malicious code that tries to take over your server. It could be just meant to fill your site up with as much random noise as possible so that it sort of falls over and stops service. And it could just be that you're looking for an email address and someone's put their phone number, something that simple. It's not necessarily dangerous, it's just annoying. So there's two types of validation. There's client-side validation and server-side. Client-side validation can be done in HTML, it can be done in JavaScript or both. And server-side validation is done in whatever language the server is implemented in. So it could be Node, it could be JS, it could be PHP, it could be lots of different things. In general, we consider client-side validation to be useful to the user, but not a security feature. So if you're concerned about your database being messed up by a user, you will not rely on client-side validation only. The reason for this is it's very easy to go into DevTools and make a few changes to the form, and suddenly the validation is gone. So instead of just relying on that one thing, which is, you know, you type into your email address field a phone number and it gives you a warning. You should put an email address here, not a phone number. That kind of validation is really to help the user get through the form correctly. And server-side validation is there to make sure the data they're sending in the form is safe to insert into the application. If you have no server-side validation or no validation at all, it's like living and leaving all of your doors and windows open every single day. You're asking for anyone to come in and do whatever they want. And that's typically not a good idea. So in terms of how to start with HTML validation and how to learn, I would definitely recommend just sticking with HTML first. Write a form, follow the MDN guide, it's very good. Write a simple form, add some HTML attributes in order to introduce simple validation rules like maybe a regex pattern for an input, and see how that process works without any code, any JavaScript code. And then once you're happy with how that system works, then you can start to listen for the form submit event, and you can start handling the data in a more intricate way where you can sort of check very specific things. Is this thing filled in and this thing? Conditional validation, which is a lot more difficult to do with just plain HTML. So I would say there's plenty of stuff to learn about HTML forms on its own without ever doing any JavaScript. And I think only once you really understand what everything is doing inside a form and why, that's the time to start making things more complex. Okay, I think those were all of the technical questions. Do we want to, are we running the query pod?
Yeah, so it'd be great to get some questions from people in the session now, just to wrap up, and then we can hopefully answer those. So what's quite cool is that one of our students has been working over the summer as an intern, working for this website and this application, and it's a live Q&A session tool. So I thought we could give it a try, and it's nice to be able to kind of see the work that some of our own are busy working on now. She's still busy studying, so that's exciting, and it's a good thing to try and do if you can over the summer, to try and get an internship, as it can lead to more work. So that's cool. So I'm going to share the link, and there's a code as well. Grab the code, and you can go across to that URL and then put in that code, and then it'll give you 60 seconds to write your question, and then 45 seconds to vote on the questions that come up. There we are. Thanks for formatting that nicely. And yeah, it'd be great to get some questions if you'd like some, and we hopefully can do like a bit of a quick fire session. And if there is a topic that's a big topic, then we can always take it out of the session and have it as its own web session as well. So yeah, if you can just go across and write a question, I'll mute myself, and then we'll chat in a minute, 30 seconds.
I'm seeing you did great, get ready to vote. Is that right? I think maybe we missed the window for asking questions.
Okay. My bad.
Okay, voting.
Did I mess it up? I must have messed it up. My bad, guys.
Can't we just use a new code?
Yeah, I'll make a new one now,
Yeah.
quick. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yep. Okay.
Okay. No, that sounds cool.
All right. Let's start.
I think we need some like quiz show countdown music. I know if you're the administrator, you get the music. There's like a soundtrack, which is quite good for setting the tone. But I don't think you get it if you're a question asker.
Yeah.
There we go.
Where do the results go after this?
So now we'll get a chance to answer the question. Oh, no, rank the question. So you say which question you prefer for the other one, and that'll start now. So now, if you can just rank them, and you'll just choose which one, and then we can have a little live session. Cool. So that came through. There were like 84 votes or something. So that's cool. I'll share my screen and then we can see. Cool. So the first question is, would you recommend to start at a company before moving on to being a freelancer?
I think I would. I have experience working in different types of companies and working as a freelancer. I was a freelancer for 2 years. I would definitely recommend, there's one way to do it where you are a freelancer first and you're basically going to people you know, offering them a cheap or a free website in order to build up a portfolio of real projects. So in that sense, like you're sort of like a freelance intern. And that's quite a good thing to do as a first step. But in terms of your career, I think you do get more structure and mentoring and like progression from joining a company. And then once you've figured out what your niche is or what you like to do all the time, then you can then sort of hive off into your own freelance business.
Can I just add to that? And I don't mean to disagree with Oliver. It's generally not recommended to freelance before you actually do have some work experience, just so that there's a lot of liability that you might have if things go wrong. And not just that, you need to, it's hard to know what you should be billing people, so you might end up getting taken advantage of. So generally it's good to sort of just, even for 6 months, work at a place and just scope out how they do things first before you go on your own.
Cool.
I would agree with Martin on that as well, to rather get experience first and see how other people work in organization and learn from them before going on your own, because you can learn so much as a freelancer, but it's good to build up people skills actually.
Great. Question number 2, who would win in a fight, MJ or Benita? Oh, I think it's a close run call. Benita has a good roundhouse. But yeah, I feel like I've got more determination to just keep going. But maybe it's not for me to say.
No comment from me either, no comment.
Question number 3 was that Oliver mentioned Linux. You want to go on about that?
Yeah, sure. So what's the best way to learn? Most definitely to install it alongside, well, you don't have to install it alongside. You can actually run a virtual machine. If you're using Windows, you can run an instance of Linux inside Windows, and that means that you don't have to have like a separate PC running a different OS, and that's very convenient. So I would say either to do a full installation, like you'll have the option to boot into Windows or Linux, or to run a virtual machine, which is probably a little bit easier. So once you have that environment, you will immediately notice that it looks and feels different. It still has a lot of them have a taskbar and they have a desktop very similar to Windows. But that's not what you're learning. You're not learning how to use the new user interface that you're faced with. You're actually learning how the system works. How you install things is very different to installing something on Windows. And I think obviously like finding courses and tutorials are going to help you learn specific tasks that you can do. But in general, you build up a sort of second sense for sixth sense for how to operate the language, the type of language you use to communicate with the system. If you're a Mac user, it's probably going to be more familiar than Windows, although that's assuming that you've have a bit of experience working with your OS, not just using your OS, using the interface. I actually, Linux was my first operating system when I was about 13. My dad gave me a broken laptop, but it didn't have a hard drive. so I couldn't install Windows. Instead, I got an Ubuntu live CD, and I loaded that, and that was my first experience with owning my own machine. And so as a teenager, I learned a lot just from having, being forced to figure out things for myself. These days, there's a lot more material out there. There's a lot you can use to make this process easier. It's quite fun to sort of run a little local web server and watch the requests coming in. It's sort of exciting the first time you look at the console and see things happening. When you like request a page, you'll see that request come through somewhere else. So get to know the system, like play around with it. If you sort of mess things up in a VM, you can always just reboot the VM how it was the day before. You can take a snapshot, and you're not going to lose work. I'm not going to recommend a Linux distribution. I will say, look around, choose one you like. Ubuntu and Debian are very, very common. So there is a sort of benefit to those just in terms of how widely saturated they are in the market. Arch, if you're a real enthusiast, is quite fun, but I don't have a strong opinion when it comes to distributions. They're often pretty similar. And if you don't like something about your distribution, it's very easy to change it. That's the whole point. If you like the GUI or the GUI from Ubuntu, but you're using Arch, you can make that, you can install that GUI kit and use it on whatever operating system you're using. So it's very modular. You can customize heavily. Yeah, it's more about what's going to work for you. Once you've learned one, it's very easy to learn the next one. We also have a comment about Docker. Docker is great. I think it is no longer free, which gives me a slight frown. But yeah, Docker is a really nice tool for like encapsulating a system. So if you have like a very specific setup for Linux, you can quickly open that and access that no matter what operating system you're running on your base machine. So I hope that answered the question.
Great. Then I'll just quickly do question 4 and 5. So in terms of the APIs that you will manage, the way we do that is through, in first year, we cover WordPress and the WordPress REST API so that you can use WordPress as a content management system. And it has its own REST API, which you can use to get data. So that's a nice way of being able to just make something quite simple. We also look at Strapi, which again is a content management system that provides you with an API. It's called a headless CMS. And so it doesn't produce content onto a page like WordPress does, but it allows us to create an API that we can make calls to. So that's a way that we can control our own APIs. Further than that, it's not, we don't cover too much more in terms of creating APIs in the course. And then I don't know if there's more to be said there, but then maybe just question 5, and then we can just wrap up there. If there's any programs in the job that would be useful to learn in your free time. Hopefully we try and choose the right programs that are going to be useful for you to know about and use in your work environment. But I think there has also been some mention today, which will be hopefully useful. I don't know if anyone has any more comments there.
Yeah, I think I would say the most important software that you need to learn is going to be something like Azure DevOps or Jira. And this is a project management platform, a continuous integration, continuous deployment platform. The idea is that you have your tasks, your work tasks that you have to do throughout the day, and you also have your code repository stored here. You have all of your pull requests happening here, And this is the way that like a lot of dev management is handled. I think Azure has a free plan and it has a student plan where they give you credit. So maybe worth just fiddling around with Azure and seeing what can be done there. It's enormous. It's like AWS. It's just like an endless ocean of options. You can do thousands of different things using that one platform. But Azure DevOps is very specifically a work management system, and it's very common in the dev environment because it sort of gets packaged up with Teams by Microsoft, and a lot of companies obviously use Microsoft already for Exchange and for their Office suite. But there are alternatives. Jira is an alternative that is, I believe, open source. And even if you go on GitHub, you'll find that you can create a project board and you can sort of manage tasks on this project board yourself. You can create a wiki on GitHub. So some sort of tool like this is going to be essential in the workplace. So if you can just get a familiarity with one of those, I'd say that's important.
Great. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. I think that was a really cool session and went really well, especially the stuff in terms of the job market. I think hopefully that's been very useful. Bit of a different take to some of our other sessions, but hopefully nice and useful. Okay, great. Well, I will post the recording so you can always watch it back later. But bye from me.
All right, cheers all.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.